It's May 13th, 2015. We're in Savannah, Georgia, the Wormslow Library with Craig Barrow. I'm Christian Lopez, and we're doing an oral history with Mr. Barrow on his stewardship and the history of Wormslow here in Savannah. Thank you very much for doing this.
Delighted.
Would you mind giving us your full name and where and when you were born?
Craig Barrow III. I was born on March the 21st, 1942 at the Telfair Hospital in Savannah, Georgia.
And who were your parents?
Craig Barrow Jr. and Laura Bell Barrow.
And you are the 10th of the 10 generations.
I'm the ninth.
The ninth.
I'm the ninth generation to own Wormslow. I'm the ninth generation to graduate from the University of Georgia. My son Thornton is the 10th generation, and he's the 10th generation to graduate from the University of Georgia.
All right. And you graduated from the University of Georgia in what year?
1965.
1965. What did you major in?
Economics.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to that. So I'm curious as to what your earliest memories are of Wormslow and sort of its importance to your family.
My earliest memories.
I'm thinking it must have been somewhere in the late 40s, you're maybe 6 or 7, somewhere, being a child.
Probably 46, 47. We would drive out, we lived on the southeast corner of 37th Street, and we would come out for Sunday midday dinner with my grandmother. It was always very formal. It was in the main dining room. She had the finger bowls, and the butlers was one Frank Jenkins, and his son Frank Jenkins Jr. would serve dinner. And it was just a fabulous experience for young children to come to, my sister and I. But back then, LaRoche Avenue was paved and Waters Avenue was paved. So you either had to come out Waters Avenue or LaRoche. Durin Avenue was dirt and Skidaway Road was dirt. And the exciting part was to go from grandmother's dinner, we'd drive home and we'd go down the dirt road, and we thought that was really cool.
Now, and that's a different entrance. Is that a different entrance than it is than the oak? Yeah, the long oak road.
Yeah, we come in there, yeah. And then we had a picnic spot back on the back side of Wormslow, facing Moon River. And the family would go out there and have picnics, and we would bathe children. And then we would come back up and see grandmother, and then we'd go to town. And then later on, probably in the 50s, we renovated the last slave cabin, and we would stay out there on the weekends. And then when I got old enough, I'd always ride my bicycle out here.
Do you have siblings?
Yeah, I have an older sister. She's 15 months older than I am. Her name is Elfrida. And then I have a younger sister, 7 years younger than I am, and her name is Laura.
And Elfrida is your grandmother's name.
Correct.
Is Elfrida for
Right.
the oral history. What do you recall of your parents' sort of early? Was there anything very early on that you noticed, sort of in the way that they would pass on the tradition of Wormslow to you, or at least the sense of stewardship that very much runs through this family?
Oh, my father preached it to me all the time.
What did he say?
Well, he said, like, if you want to see somebody go broke, watch them develop their land, because when they get to the last lot, they sell it, and they don't know what else to do, and they run out of money. And a man's job is to work hard to preserve the land and not to develop it. You go out and learn how to make a living, and you can take care of your land. That was preached to me for as long as I can remember. And it's a great lesson, because you can see it all over America today, where people inherit their family's land and they develop it and they live high off the hog, and then they get down to the last lot.
Do you think his awareness, what role do you think Wimberley, Wormslow, and Augusta Duren's experience not being able to take care of Wormslow sort of shaped that perspective
No.
with your...
No. The Barrow family came from Oglethorpe County. My grandfather, Craig Barrow, grew up there.
Right, up north.
And they always had a good work ethic. And there was just no question about their work ethic. He was a doctor, and then my father was a very successful investment banker, stockbroker. And they were very prudent people. And I think they were disgusted with Wimberley. But you got to remember, my grandmother let Wimberley live here for 18 years after she bought the mortgage. And so she tried her best to be benevolent to him. And then when he started selling off the collection, Duke wanted to buy it, North Carolina wanted to buy it, and my grandfather, because of his connections at the University of Georgia, he was president of the Alumni Association. And they went to the General Assembly and got the General Assembly to buy the collection for the university, and then gave Wimberley a life estate of working as the head of the Red Books Library.
Which became the
Hargreaves.
the foundation library for the University of Georgia Libraries. Yes. Did your siblings also, did they also share this sense of stewardship? They did, I'm assuming that they did, but.
Yes, they did. But my sense of stewardship didn't really get serious until I moved out here. Then it hits you hard, and then you realize. So they never had that opportunity.
What year did you move out here?
1986.
1986, and so.
Let me give you a little help there.
Please.
I was very fortunate that anything that involved Wormslow, the Wormslow Foundation, my father included me in it from a very, very early age. I'm not going to say he asked my opinion on things, but he shared everything with me. So I know the whole history from my grandmother up, because I was fortunate that he advised me and told me what he was doing or what he was thinking, and then, yes, I was involved in everything. So you learned that my grandmother wanted the University of Georgia to own Wormslow in 1948. That was her goal. Well, then, that didn't get communicated properly. And so I don't think the chancellor of the university at that time really got the message from Dr. Coulter and Herbert Owens that were pushing this. So it just fell through the cracks. So then, in an effort to preserve Wormslow, they created in 1951 the Wormslow Foundation. They put, once it got approved by the IRS, she put a huge chunk of the land into the foundation so it would always be preserved. Well, in hindsight, it was a mistake. Reasons why. Number one, the county still taxed it as a developed piece of property. And we fought that and went to the Supreme Court of Georgia, lost 5-4. And the reason we lost was because it wasn't open to the public. And it's probably a blessing in disguise that we lost that, because shortly thereafter, the federal government changed the laws on private foundations that you have to pay out 5% of your assets. Well, the foundation didn't have hardly any money at all, but it had a piece of property that was worth a huge amount of money. So we'd have been forced to sell the land or do something because of that 5%. So in hindsight, it was a blessing that we lost that battle. Well, at the same time, there was a wonderful preservationist in Atlanta named Jane Yorn, and she was very close to Jimmy Carter, who was governor. She went to Jimmy Carter and said, Georgia needs a heritage trust program to hold valuable pieces of land. And he agreed. And she said, if you do it, you've got to have a piece that is just the best there is for your first property, because it's got to make an impact on the state. Well, if she was doing that, we lost the tax case. So she approached us, vice versa, and we made a deal to put it in the Georgia Heritage Trust Program. It would be the first historic site in Georgia. We put it through the Nature Conservancy, and they held it until the trust program got set up. That trust program is the model for the United States. It's significant. And there's a man who founded the Nature Conservancy, Patrick Noonan. He then went from the Nature Conservancy to the Conservation Fund, and he's chairman emeritus. And I walked in that office one day and introduced my name to the secretary, and he heard my name in the back. He was in the back office, and he said, Craig Barrow, you made the most significant contribution that's ever been made in conservation in America. So that's how significant he felt the Wormslow gift was.
Now that the court case was what year was that? That was decided.
It had to been right around the 1970s.
All right. So we're talking
71, 72.
Okay, and so we're that's a good 20 plus years after the foundation had been formed.
Right.
And so it had already gone through several processes sort of to get to that final point. And the foundation was already active doing other things, some of which we'll talk to, publications and whatnot.
Well, consequently at that time too, the county,
Chatham County,
wanted to condemn Wormslow because they wanted to build the Diamond Causeway down the avenue. And they thought that was the most perfect place to build the highway to Skidaway Island.
This is in the early 70s.
And was probably, it was right in the 60s, late
Okay.
60s.
So leading up to that.
So to stop them, we said we would give them the right-of-way in the marsh south of Wormslow, and they could build that road to Skidaway across that marsh. That's the Wormslow Marsh because it's a King's Grant, and we owned it. And so we gave them the right-of-way to build that causeway, which turned out to be an environmental sort of mess, because back then you could take the fill out of and put it in the marsh. Well, my father said he was tired of fighting, and he said, yeah, whatever, let's do it. And that's why this is all silting up out here.
Right.
Back to the foundation. The foundation was created basically to preserve Wormslow. At the same time, Dr. Coulter from the university said, we had a long-term relationship with the press as it was, but said, why don't we create a history series and do a book on Wormslow? Well, that would help justify the preservation of Wormslow and the foundation. So that's how the relationship really took off with the University of Georgia Press.
With the press.
Was that first book, Wormslow.
Now, so during this period of the 50s, which I realize you were still a kid, do you have memories of what else the foundation was involved with, and Elfrida's, her activities with that?
There was
or was that something that you were much?
I was very familiar with. They had a man. He was a biologist out at Armstrong, named Leslie Davenport, and he wanted to study the life cycle of the shrew. And the shrew lives on the ground, and it's a little thing that looks like a mouse almost. And he put these cans all over Wormslow and studied the shrew. And they thought doing that research and having that research would substantiate the foundation owning the property. And so there was things like that done. And then Herbert Owens from the university used to bring his landscape architecture class down here to study. And I think Eugene Odom came down quite a bit to study.
So this sounds like this was some of the early first academic research projects happening on Wormslow, which now are very much a part of Wormslow's identity and presence here in the 21st century. But in that, as early as you're saying, in the mid 50s, UGA was already coming down and understanding its potential for scientific research.
And then there was sort of a lull, and then Bill Kelso did the dig at the fortified house, and he was getting his PhD at Emory.
Right, and that was in the late 70s, right?
Early 70s.
Somewhere there, okay.
It was early.
Now you'd mentioned the landscape architecture class coming down. Can you describe for us sort of the period of Wormslow where there was an emphasis on gardens or was there an emphasis more on gardens was it your grandmother?
No, it was Augusta Durin.
Okay, so that was pre that.
And she was famous for her gardens and had elaborate gardens in the back of the house and opened them to the public. And the theory was that was really the time that the motor car excelled. And so people would take these trips in their motor car to go see places along. And so Wormslow was one place they would come, and they'd pay to see the garden. So she was doing that to try to subsidize Wormslow.
This was in the 30s?
30s. And then when they left, it stopped. And my grandmother and grandfather renovated the house. And my grandfather wrote my father a letter that I have a copy of. And it said, "Wormslow has been resurrected, and I hope you will grow to love it as much as we do." And that's a pretty powerful sentence,
right?
I think. And then the only time Wormslow was ever opened after that to the public was Christ Church would have a tour of homes, and they would charge admission and benefit the church. But other than that, Wormslow was private.
So that was from right around 1938 until the time the foundation was established in 51. Okay, so 12 or 13.
But I knew what was going on, but I was sent off to school when I was 11. I went to the Asheville School for Boys in Asheville, North Carolina, and I was there for 7 years. So there was a period that I was only here for Christmas and spring. Because in the summers I was in North Carolina, a family farm up there. But I knew what was going on, and my grandmother corresponded with me when I was in school and would tell me, oh, this happened and that happened, and you know.
So what happened to the gardens during that period after?
They cleaned them up. My grandmother cleaned them out, and the wonderful caretaker, Frank Jenkins, who served as a butler and a caretaker, told me there was, at the front of the house, there was a big pool. And he said, your grandmother told me to take everything out of that garden and throw it in that pool and cover it up with dirt.
And that's what happened to the garden.
She was a very plain, simple, frugal person. She didn't like frills. I mean, she's very, very intellectual. And Augusta had gnomes and all kind of stuff in the garden, and she just, what they didn't take to Athens, she buried. And she wanted it to be clean and simple and neat.
So you go away to school for 7 years, and when did you return?
After I graduated from Georgia, 65,
Okay.
Then I went to the National Guard, because at the height of Vietnam. Thank goodness I got in the National Guard, and did that 6 months, and then came back to Savannah.
Okay. Okay. So I have in my notes in the early 60s, or I guess 1961, the foundation ceded several hundred acres, and at that same time, Wormslow became open for research by appointment. And so...
That's when Leslie Davenport did his research.
Right. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I want to sort of to put this in context with the interview that Wormslow now is widely recognized as a haven for multi and interdisciplinary research with the University of Georgia, so I'm trying to document this trend of its use by researchers in UGA over decades.
But it was very casual then, and it was just very casual. It was sort of window dressing for the foundation, and then it all stopped. It didn't exist until recently.
All right. So you graduate in 65, and did you come back here? And you're living in Savannah, but you weren't actually living on the property, which you said you did not
No,
do
I
until
was living
1980
downtown.
till 1986.
Yeah.
Right. And when did Elfrida pass?
1970.
1970.
The very interesting thing there, it was really death can be beautiful if you accept it. Grandmother died, and my father told me, now you think about this, I was 28 years old, and my father said, son, I can't handle it. You take care of it.
What year was this?
1970. I was 28. I went upstairs, pulled the sheet over her head, called the funeral home. They came out and got her, and Daddy going home. The butler and his wife, Frank Jenkins and his wife, Rosalie, were standing at the bottom of the steps. And when they brought Grandmother down, they bowed at her. It was the most beautiful scene I've ever seen. And then I buried her. And we had it back here in the cemetery. And I made sure there was no wheelbarrows, no shovels, no vehicles. It was all a natural setting. There was nothing man-made in that setting. And it was beautiful. Well, then I ended up burying my father, and then I ended up burying my mother. And they were both cremated. So I personally buried them. And that's a beautiful experience, to put your people to rest.
What was your father's relationship with your grandmother?
Oh, very close, very respectful, very, very loving, close. It was a great relationship.
What was his role sort of with her in the, running the foundation and also sort of managing the estate? Or did she, what was that?
He always respected her, but she respected him, and he had the business mind. I mean, my father graduated from the University of Georgia with every honor there was, practically. He graduated in 3 years. And then he went in the Army doing, well, actually, he went to work in the investment brokerage business. And then World War II broke out, and he volunteered as a private to go in at age 40. And went through boot camp and everything as a private. Well, he was real smart because he knew that if he went in as an officer, he'd go over there. If he went in as a private, they wouldn't send a 40-year-old man to war. And he was right. So he rode out the war with a desk job as a 40-year-old private. Then he came back and went in the investment business.
So his sort of stewardship with Elfrida was sort of ongoing in tandem. And then...
It was almost with him, it was almost a burning desire to make sure her wishes of the preservation of this site would always be there. And it goes back to Noble Jones's will. Noble Jones, when he died, his will said that he wanted this always to be the family home. And it's worked for 9 generations.
So how was your father's, did Elfrida's passing deeply affect your father and his ability, or it was an emotional, and so I'm wondering at this sense, or this period where you're back from college, and when did you sort of, did you develop a new sense of the responsibility?
No, I already had it. I had it. I didn't develop the new sense until I moved out here. I mean, I knew one day I would live here. And I knew I'd take care of it. But I didn't know the magnitude of all that. And you can't know it until you own it and live on it.
So your grandmother passes in 1970, and your father is going to pass 8 years after that. What do those 8 years look like?
They're great.
When he has become the steward of Wormslow.
And we had great times. We'd come out here and bring the kids and all. It was wonderful. But he was always, the site's got to be preserved. You take care of this, do this. But Daddy was a businessman, but he wasn't a handyman. He didn't know how to use tools or a tractor or anything like that. There's not a piece of equipment on earth that I can't run. Backhoe, bulldozer, you name it. Any tool I can do. And my philosophy has always been, if I have somebody working for me, that I can do a better job. I can do the job better than they can. So I'm not going to ask them to do something I can't do, period. So I can do everything. Well, he didn't. And he didn't believe in heavy machinery because he didn't understand it. So he had these caretakers that we're using hand tools to maintain this place. So it wasn't maintained. And if you look at this window here, that was all this jungle of azaleas when I moved out here. And his philosophy was, if you hide the house, nobody knows it's there, so you don't see anybody. Well, that's wrong, because they can walk up in the bushes and be right in your backyard and you don't know it. You clear it out like I did, and let somebody walk across that yard. They won't. They're scared to.
So that's interesting. This transition from the groundskeeping, sort of using, from really a technology or a caretaking from an earlier century to something that's more modern. This period from before your father's death, and you'd mentioned that Chatham County wanted to put a road through, and you'd mentioned earlier that he was tired of fighting. Can you talk a little bit or share a little bit about what that experience of working with the county, the municipality, what sort of any insights you have into that process, and what its impact was?
Well, every infringement on this piece of property has been made by the government. The county, the city, you name it. And there are ulterior motives that make county governments do things. I don't care if this gets on the record, but this is the truth. Curtis Lewis was mayor of Savannah. He also owns Green Island, which is just south of Skidaway Island. It's a big island. He convinced us, somebody convinced Union Camp that they ought to give the state a state park on Skidaway Island. And they would give this state park if they would build the Diamond Causeway, the road. So the politicians look around and they say, well, the straightest line to Skidaway Island is down that avenue at Wormslow. And their mentality was to my father, well, we're doing you a favor. We're going to build a highway in there, then you can develop Wormslow, and you'll make a lot of money. No. So they gave the causeway. Well, the state park was supposed to be at Priest's Landing. When Joe Tanner came down to see the state park after they built the road, the deeds had been swapped. And the state park was no longer at Priest's Landing, it was over back here on the back side of the island. So right after that, Curtis Lewis filed a permit to build the bridge to Green Island. And Joe Tanner denied it. And so they couldn't build he said, if you can't build a causeway, you have to build a bridge. And they couldn't afford to build a bridge. And that stopped it. But that's what motivated that whole process. And so anytime the city or the county wants to do something, there's an ulterior motive that you don't know what it is. I don't have a lot of confidence. And it's easier, you hear everybody's trying to protect the natural environment. So if the city or the county wants to build a waste dump or a wastewater treatment plant or something, where do they want to go? They go to the farthest piece of property that's the best wilderness. And they want to develop it for some purpose. All you just look around and look everywhere you go. As the city grows, well, we'll put that wastewater plant over here. Put that garbage dump over there. Farmer Brown won't mind. He's only one of them.
Did did Elfrida anticipate, or did she have a sense of the threats to development during the early? And there were. I realized that the threats were a little bit different then during that period.
No, I think she was aware of that because her brother sold off a portion of Wormslow that created Wimberley, you know. And there's also a feeling that the third generation is going to screw it up. Well, I'm the third generation, so they might have said, we better protect it from him. I mean, that's a natural thought process. I was young and I hadn't proven myself yet.
So what was that like to know that was sort of out there, and that there is, there will be this expectation, that expectation is there? What is it like as a young man to grow up in this family and see all this going on?
I didn't. I just looked at it case by case. I didn't have some macro theory or anything like that.
So, leading up to,
I mean, I didn't expect my father to drop dead in 1978. I mean, he was barely 72. And I thought he was going to be around a long time.
So when your father passed, what happens then? What happens with you?
Amazing.
And your family?
Amazing. As I said, I think death is a beautiful thing, and it's going to happen, so you better just make the best of it. I was in New York and got a call that Daddy was found in his car in the parking lot of the company, and he was having a heart attack. And they rushed him to Canla Hospital. And I flew home, went in there, and they found out that he had a aorta that needed the muscle. It had gotten so big, the blood couldn't flow through from pumping, so they were going to go in and shave the muscle. So I went in, I said, Daddy, you want me to live in Wormslow? Is that correct? He said, yes, sir, I'm counting on it. I said, well, what about your will? And he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll take care of it when I get out of the hospital. And I said, well, what if you don't make it? That's pretty hard to tell you, Dad. And he said, well, maybe you're right. Maybe I better do the will. Found out the will was written in 1954, and the bank, CNS Bank, was the trustee. Well, the first thing the CNS Bank would have told my mother is sell Wormslow, you can't afford it. So I went out, and my two sisters and mother was sitting in the waiting room. And I said, got news for y'all. Daddy doesn't have a will. And Mother, the bank's going to be telling you what to do. And how you like that? She did not like that. So my older sister, Frida, said, I said, we got to have a trustee. My older sister, Frida, said, well, I'll be the trustee because I'm the oldest with Mother. And I said, that's fine with me. But you can't live in Charleston and be the trustee. You need to move to Savannah because Daddy had all this air property that he'd never settled. And he had his sister he had to take care of with the air property and various things. So I said, she said, well, you better be the executor. I went, well, if you want me to, I will. Well, it's the smartest thing they ever did. And he didn't make it through the surgery. So I was with him to the last second. And I came out here, it must have been 5:30 in the morning, and my mother and my sister were sitting on the porch. And I went and I said, well, Daddy didn't make it. And Mother said, well, you take care of it, and you're in charge. arrange everything. So I left and I walked back to the cemetery, and it was just daybreak. And I'm leaning over the wall looking to see what I needed to get cleaned up and get done. And this hand comes down out of the sky on my shoulder. It's just, and I looked up, and it's Frank Jenkins. And Frank was about 6'5". And I looked up, and he said, "You are now the master." That's about the most powerful things that ever happened to me in my life. He said, "You are now the master." And from that day on, in 1970, I was the master of Wormslow. And I took that responsibility. And I asked Frank, I said, "Frank, how did you know I was here? How'd you know?" And he said, "Oh, I knew. And I was sitting behind this tree waiting on you. There's a big live oak right there, and he was sitting there waiting on me." And pretty powerful.
How old were you then? You would
I was 36.
36.
38.
And you didn't move out here until
86.
Till 8 years.
Mother
8 years
stayed
later.
out here, but both of my parents, you couldn't ask for better parents ever. So if I say something, I don't mean it derogatory, but Mother wasn't a business person. She trusted me just like Grandmother trusted Daddy, and so I ran Wormslow, but didn't move out here. And then it just became a bigger and bigger and bigger burden. And finally, my sisters convinced her to move to town. And then we moved out here. And we were going to give it a year, see how we liked it, whether it would work. And it's worked fine.
So at that time in 1978, how many acres are you steward of?
Well,
because there's some of that's with has already gone to the Department of Natural.
we had the 65 acres, and then we had 15 acres, the cabin. And Daddy gave the cabin to the Wormslow Foundation. And so the foundation owned the cabin. Well, when he did that, nobody knows why he did it. He never said it. He just brought the paper to me and said, "Sign this." And I said, what am I signing? He said, "Well, I'm going to give the cabin to the Wormslow Foundation." I said, "Okay, whatever." I mean, I'm going to tell him not. It wasn't my business.
The cabin is a slave cabin.
Yeah.
Sort of a slave cabin.
And so he gave it, well, if it's in a private foundation, the trustees can't use it. So my mother was furious. She was furious at it because my wife and I stayed out there all the time and took care of it. And so I went and bought a farm up in Effingham County, and was happy running that. And then all of a sudden, I had 2 places to take care of.
So what does taking care? So at this point, what does that entail? What is a day or a week like in that period for you?
My philosophy is you always ought to leave something better than you found it, no matter what. Leave it better than you found it, okay? I was taught that land should never be mortgaged. So I have never mortgaged Wormslow, ever. Everything's paid for. Well, when you are 38 years old and you got 2 kids going to private school, we just had to suck it up and do the best we could and make things work. Well, the first thing I had to do is put a new roof on the house. Well, that sort of sucked up everything. And then I had to paint it. Ooh. So, fortunately, I've been successful business-wise, and now I'm in a position to do things that I couldn't do when I first moved out here. And so gradually we keep improving it, and making changes. And And then we've been very fortunate that we've had some movies, and we had Louis Vuitton come out and do a whole catalog shoot. And so whenever we do that, we put the money back in the property. I mean, I don't consume it. I'd say this is newfound money, and I need to make an improvement with it. And those movies have been very helpful.
And you'd mentioned you had changed the grounds from, to be more open.
Were there any more open and easier to maintain?
Right.
I mean, this was a jungle back here. It was just azaleas, tons of them, and then wisteria all growing through there. Well, azaleas are beautiful, 2 weeks out of the year, and the rest of the time they're not the prettiest plant on earth. And so I brought my backhoe and tractor in here and got rid of them.
So how many acres now are you master of? Yes.
Well, it depends. Legally, 65. But I am master of worm slough. Whether they like it or not, I am. And if something goes wrong with the DNR, I get it fixed. If something goes wrong back here with UGA property, I get it fixed. I mean, UGA's not here. I am. And I go back there, ride back there and check on things and make sure it's right. And if it's not, I'll get it right one way or another. Because our whole deal is we've created a partnership with DNR, with UGA, with the Wormslow Foundation, and me. Now, they all got to work together. Somebody's got to see that happens, and that's me, because nobody else is. I mean, state employees go home every day at 5 o'clock.
How old is your son?
He's 43.
And I'm assuming that this message of the sense of stewardship also you've passed on to him. At what age did you take the same tact as your father did in passing that sense of eventual
Not really,
responsibility?
somewhat different. My mother got mad at me one day. She said, because the pest control guy that was doing Wormslow was doing her house. The guy that comes in, and he comes in to mother and says, I don't understand that boy out there. He doesn't know anything about that place. So mother tells me, you got to start teaching Thornton about Wormslow. You're not teaching him anything. I said, well, you didn't teach me anything. But I said, let me tell you what's going to work. He loves that land more than anything. If he loves it, he'll take care of it. If he gets caught up in the history and learning all that stuff, he'll get buried in the history and won't know how to take care of the land. I've got 2 great cousins. They're great, but they're students, professors. And they got caught up in history. I don't. That's why we have museums. I can tell you more what is going to happen in the future that I forget all this stuff in the past. I don't dwell on it.
It has always struck me with that sort of seems to be one of the concurrent themes always with Wormslow is that there, or perhaps maybe not at the very beginning, but there's always a sort of sense of history. But then one of the things that is so remarkable about Wormslow is its history of its many and varied uses over centuries. And it's one of the things that the Institute for, Wormslow Institute for Environmental History and the Center for Research and Education at Wormslow value so highly because of that, and that it strikes me that it's not as if you don't value a sense of Wormslow's history, but it seems very practical, your sense of stewardship in it now. I'm wondering if what you see sort of going forward. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but what do you anticipate, or is there anything currently that is happening here that you feel is going to have an impact, or
a good impact or a bad impact?
either?
That's a whole nother subject. I mean, what's the rising sea level going to do to Wormslow?
Well, right.
You know, I tend to think, and we had this discussion last night about this, I tend to think that we've set the foundation, and we're that far away from some very, very exciting things happening. I don't think the administration at the University of Georgia can really envision the huge potential that's here. I know so many faculty, and Dean Dan Nietzsche. I mean, the first time he walked on this property, he saw it, and he knew it, And he's been a loyal supporter. Mary Ellen Brooks, I've got a plaque on the wall in honor of her. I mean, she knew the Durin collection. She knew everything in it. She knew the value. And she made overtures to meet me before I even moved out here. And she had a huge impact, I guess, on my appreciating what all was here. And I value her friendship. And there was another person who was head of the Red Books Library, Richard Hallwell. And he was a client of mine because he was at Georgia Southern, and then he went to the university. And he helped keep me posted on things. And I think he was the one that motivated Mary Ellen to come down here, and one thing led to another, and became good friends.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Wormslow's relationship with UGA. So you had mentioned, we know that that the second Duren collection, because the first library burned in the Civil War, and the second collection came to the University of Georgia in the early 20th century, which you had mentioned earlier. But there's been this relationship with the foundation and the Barrow family with the UGA press. When did you first become involved with the press and sort of the publishing aspect of the foundation and things library related, book related? Because Wormslow has a very strong and rich history of associated with its libraries and the publications.
So let's look at it this way. When Daddy died in 1978, the Wormslow Foundation was worth $200,000. It could pay out $10,000 a year. That was peanuts. The foundation today is worth over $4 million too. And nobody has made one contribution to it except me. I have made that foundation more than anybody ever dreamed it could be. It's now paying out $200,000 a year. It's doing, right now it's underwriting 7 Wormslow Fellows. It's got 2 series of books, the Wormslow History Series and the Wormslow Nature Series at the UGA Press. The History Series was about as dull a a book series as you could ever see. And if you go into the press, and I can show you the books over there, they got the green covers and the white labels. That was the significant design. That's all they could design, was the green books. Well, I changed all that. And they also wanted all the books, the foundation wanted all the books numbered, series 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, nobody would buy a book because if they didn't have series 1, 2, and 3, why would you buy series 4? So I had to come to the foundation and say, we're not numbering books anymore. And we're not doing green and white jackets. We're going to start doing footed jackets. Well, that was a hard thing to get some of the older members like my aunt to shift. So it was a gradual process. So I've worked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've worked with 5 directors of the press. So I know as much about the press as the current directors do. And I wasn't going to do this, but they begged me and begged me and begged me and begged me, and they wouldn't get up and leave the table, so I had to finally say yes to be the chairman of that press board. And it's been a great experience. I've really, really enjoyed it. And so I pretty much know what goes on at the press. And I feel like I've taken the Wormslow Foundation to a whole nother level by that association, because we're well known. And that's what I was telling you. It's a win-win. Yeah, we've helped the press, and they're very thankful. Well, I'm very thankful for the opportunity because of what it's done for Wormslow.
Who's on the foundation right now? Who comprises the foundation?
Okay, the wife of the owner has always been the chairman. So my grandmother was chairman, then my mother. But mother was the figurehead. I mean, she would say, Craig, do I have to call the meeting to order? I'd say, yeah, mother, you call the meeting to order, and then I'll give the treasurer's report, and I'll do this and I'll do that. So my wife is now the chairman. I'm the treasurer. We have a lawyer, Wiley Ellis. It's outside. My son's on it. My sister, older sister, Frida, and my cousin, Mac. Well, we were a private foundation, and then I decided I got to get some muscle in here. So I asked Chuck Knapp. He joined it, the foundation, and then Dorinda Dahlmeyer, and they're on it. And I'm thinking about expanding it further this year. I want it to always be a family foundation as long as the family's here, but I want enough muscle to carry it forward if there's no more family.
So Chuck Knapp, Charles Knapp, former president of the University of Georgia, certainly has muscle. So with Dorinda's, Dahlmeyer's membership on the board, what does she bring to the foundation?
Well, she brings a very...
She's College of Environment and Design, is that correct?
Right, and runs the Environmental Ethics Certificate Program. Right. She's a writer. She's been on the editorial review board of the press. She knows the inside politics of a university probably as well as anybody. She's got a law degree. She's a huge environmentalist, knows the environment, and so she's closely related. And then she and I become very good friends. She had me come speak at the environmental ethics program on stewardship. And so we kindred spirits, but she's brings a lot to the table.
Is this the first time that non-family members have been
No,
on the
no,
foundation?
when it started, it had non-family members. We used to have the president of Armstrong College, Dr. Coulter was on the board.
Right.
And then when we gave it to the state, we said, why be a public foundation? Why have outside members? Let's keep it just in the family. And it's kind of a mistake because I'm the dictator. I have made the foundation. I have sweated. I'm the one that's done it. And I don't need my aunt or my cousin flying in from Virginia telling me what to do and then going back to Virginia. You know, I have made it, and I take all the credit. And I have the authority. I mean, if you don't like it, then I'm sorry, but leave. You can get off the board.
All right, I'd like to talk about the Department of Natural Resources. Some of the sort of benefits and the challenges for Wormslow in that relationship, which, correct me if I'm wrong, pretty much starts right after the Supreme Court case.
Exactly.
In the 70s.
Overall, it has been a great partnership. And if you think about the maintenance that they do, that I don't have to do, the protection, the gates, you know, open at 9 and close at 5. So there's a whole infrastructure that they manage and take care of that we don't have to. There's still challenges. And for example, in the 80s, there was an island called Pigeon Island that was part of Wormslow. And Wimberley sold it to a Nelson family. Some developers bought it. And if you go to Skidaway, you look to your right, there's this beautiful island called Pigeon Island. The developers bought it, and the DNR issued a permit for the developers to build a bridge across the Wormslow Marsh. They made an error because they were thinking it was state marsh, but it was marsh that had the conservation easement on it from the deed we gave to the Nature Conservancy. So I had to fight that and stop it. And it got pretty ugly. And nobody wanted to take responsibility. So I met with DNR and my lawyer, and I said, we're gonna go, here's the deal.
What year is this?
I think it's 1985, right in that period. It was the year that was Pierre Howard was lieutenant governor. And I said, here's the deal. Wormslow Foundation will put up $100,000. Y'all put up the rest of the money to buy the island. If you don't buy that island and you let it be developed across the Wormslow Marsh, then you're telling me that you don't respect the covenants that we put on this property. I will bankrupt the Wormslow Foundation, spend every nickel fighting you. And when I get finished, I will then develop my site and use that money to fight you. But I am going to win, so you better buy the island. They got a ruling from King and Spalding, and King and Spalding said that if I sued them, I'd win. So they bought the island. And they put it in the Heritage Trust program, and it's now part of Wormslow. The beauty of it is, the other day in the paper, we read the newspaper, and guess where one of the eagle's nests is? It's on Pigeon Island. So when people go back and forth to Skidaway, they don't look at this island full of condominiums. They look at something that's natural and beautiful. It is protected. That's one of the challenges you have with DNR, but you just have to know that you're the master, and you're just going to have to make it work and preserve Wormslow.
Have you found, are there people with the Department of Natural Resources who've you've found you've been able to work especially well with?
Yeah. Hmm. I mean, those are probably some of the most underpaid people on earth. Most of their staff is part-time. They're dedicated people. I mean, they really believe in what they're doing, or they would be working for that kind of pay. Every superintendent's been a little bit different. This current superintendent, I think, is the best we've ever had. He's impressed with what we're doing. He wants to be a part of what we're doing. He wants to help Sarah any way he can, and so it's a great teamwork, I think.
By Sarah, you mean Sarah Ross?
Yes.
And Sarah Ross is she's many things, but she's the director for the Center for Research and Education at Wormslow, the University of Georgia, and also the director for the Wormslow Institute for Environmental History.
And the president of the Wormslow Foundation.
And president of the Wormslow Foundation. Can we talk about Sarah now? Do we want to? Is that a good segue?
Yeah.
Well, how did you meet Sarah Ross?
I met Sarah Ross. The Savannah Science Museum was disbanding, and Dale Thorpe was trying to figure out how to shut it down and what to do with the collections. And she knew Sarah and asked Sarah to come over to her house, and then asked me to come over and let's see what we could do to figure it out. So I met Sarah then, and we came up with some really cool plans. One thing that was good is at that time I was chairman of the Center for Wildlife Education at Georgia Southern and was raising the money to build that center. So I was real close to Nick Henry. And Georgia Southern wanted the tick collection or the salamander collection, one of the collections. And so I came up and made a suggestion. Yeah, okay, we'll give you the collection, but you're gonna have to give there's a Coretta Turtle Project, and they have an office and a staff. I said, you gotta give them permanent housing in your building downtown Savannah. If you give them permanent housing free, we'll consider the collection. So that happened. And so the various things Sarah saw that I did, and she realized that I could get some things happening in Savannah. So she went back to Washington and had a chance to build something on the East Coast. And it was going to be a marine sanctuary aquarium. And she went to the governor, got the governor to approve it. She went to the county, got them to give the property. Then she comes to me and asks me how I could help her make this project happen. And I said, well, we'll have a party at Wormslow. We'll do something out there. But you got to get me a big name. You got to get somebody to come that we can draw a crowd. And she said, how about Robert Ballard? I said, you can't get Robert Ballard. There's no way. Well, Robert Ballard came and he brought his underwater stuff and everything. And we had this great program and we were rocking. And we were getting ready to announce that we're going to move this thing to Savannah. And the mayor of Charleston called Fritz Hollings and said, we don't want this in Savannah. So the day of the event, Fritz Hollings called Noah and said, if you announce that event in Savannah, you announce that aquarium, we're cutting all your funding off. So that was the end of that. So, meanwhile, Don and I were discussing and my lawyer was telling me, you got to do something about Wormslow. You got to do something about Wormslow. How are you going to leave it to Thornton and not have it correct? And you got to do something. And so we hired this highfalutin consultant in Washington, highly recommended. And brought him down here, spent a lot of money, and had a big meeting planned. And I'd asked Sarah to serve on the board of the UGA Press because I was building this board, and I knew she was smart as a whip, and she'd serve on that board. So she agreed to do it. And I took her to a meeting with the university in Athens where they were discussing partnering with Wormslow and doing something.
What year was this?
I don't know, it's about 10 years ago. And Sarah looked at this meeting. I asked her to come, and I said, why don't you just be my friend and come to this meeting? And she said, Craig, these people are ridiculous. They don't know what they're doing, and you can just walk all over. This is not good. So we had this meeting scheduled here in Savannah, and I said, would you come down and just be my private, quiet consultant? Because the university's coming in and making this big proposal, and DNR's going to be there, everybody's going to be there, and my consultant from Washington's going to be there, and just sit back and let me know what's going on. And she said she'd do it. So the meeting, for many reasons, blew up, and everybody was mad, everybody walked away, and me and my consultants met over at the house, and Sarah said, you know, I was born to do this. I was born to do this. Wormslow's got my name all over it. So we got rid of the consultant, got rid of everybody, and made Sarah, elected her president of the Wormslow Foundation. And then she built this scientific advisory board. It was her idea, and she'll go into that in detail in her interview with you. But she put the advisory board together to study Wormslow, to study what needed to be done here and how it needed to be done. And then one thing she recommended was to create the Wormslow Institute, which is a public foundation. And so we did that. Then we started supporting the Wormslow Fellows, doing the research. We try every time. The important thing was every time we had a plan and it failed, the next plan was better. So the failures were a blessing, really. We didn't think so at the time, but we had a lot of no's going down the road, and we were trying to work with Governor Perdue, and he was all for everything we were proposing, and at the last minute, he decided to buy Casey Woods and forget about Wormslow. It turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Sarah brought in Dan Anichek immediately, and he immediately saw what we were doing and why we were doing it, and got on board and helped her. We've had Chuck Knapp support, so Sarah's had him to fall back on, Dorinda Dahlmeyer, and so it's evolved into a really, really phenomenal situation. But it's her credit, not mine. The only lucky thing I did was ask her to serve on the press board and then say, how about, because I trusted her and I knew she knew what she was doing, and I said, how about just being my support, just see what's going on and tell me if you think things are wrong, and everything got wrong. And
so that first meeting where UGA and DNR and you and Sarah were at, that was the first official or formal meeting to discuss a formal relationship with the University of Georgia and the Wormslow Foundation and Wormslow and DNR. Would that be correct?
that was the first. There'd been some other meetings, because what happened on it, Mason appointed a committee. And I was under the impression that the committee had met a lot and had studied and had a program. Well, they hadn't. And so that committee was totally unprepared. So when they came down, they got a plan that they dreamed in the car coming down. And it just wasn't a good plan. And They would call this the Savannah campus of the University of Georgia, and Wormslow would have disappeared, no name, anything. The guy from the Conservation Fund was here, Rex Bonner, and he went ballistic. I mean, everybody did. DNR was mad. Everybody was mad.
So the intention at that, or the one of the ideas was for Wormslow to become a campus.
It was going to be the University of Georgia campus in Savannah. But that was not a university idea. It was one person's idea that was on that committee. And
so again, this sense of development and a potential use, obviously not in keeping with the spirit of Stewards of Winslow.
But and people have to realize too, you know, I'm the ninth generation from Georgia, and my family has huge, huge connections with Georgia. The second president, Alonzo Church, longest serving president, David Crenshaw Barrow. I mean, we go way back. So my loyalty was to Georgia. It wasn't to that committee. So when Sarah said she would do it, then I went to Aunt Mace and said, the only way we'll go forward with this is if Sarah Ross has academic license to do this. And he said no. And then Chuck Knapp intervened with Tom Landrum, and they hired Sarah, paid half her salary, and we paid half her salary. And then we worked on this gift for years, getting it right. And then finally it all came together.
So I'm thinking back in 1948, what you'd said that Elfrida had intimated that she wished for this.
She tried to give the whole place to the university.
Right. And so it, 40 plus, 50 plus, 60 plus years,
right,
you know, later to get to that point. But even at that point where it's beginning to be realized, it's an imperfect process as things are. But you had mentioned that there were failures, you know, along that way, getting to where we are now, as all things are. So what were some of those? Do you mind sharing some of those experiences that didn't work out right in the
first meeting with the university, the one that was run by Aunt Mace, was a disaster. Okay, what we were thinking was, then what we could do is we could sell the foundation property back here to the state, and it would become part of the state site. And we had it appraised, and it was right at $6 million. The state would buy it, and then we would put it in an endowment, and we would spend all the money back on Wormslow. And Purdue flew down here in his helicopter, brought his wife, we had lunch, everything was great. We were told this is really going to go. And then at the last minute, when he bought that property, Casey Woods, and cleaned out all the coffers, there was no money left. And he never even said anything, so it was just not a deal. Well, that turned out as a blessing, I think, in disguise, because I think the plan we've got now is as good as it gets. And we've almost gone full circle, because originally we thought about recreating the slave village, and then we pushed that aside. We had all these other people come down. We had Lyons, one of these big museum consultants, Lion Rizimba, something like that. And Cheryl brought them down. They did a whole study. We had charrettes. We did it all. And it was a lot of processes we went through.
Well, let's talk about sort of some of those processes with the foundation and how it operates, how it chooses its projects and priorities, and certainly I think with Sarah as its president, she hasn't always been its. How long has she been president of the
Probably 6 years.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
so during this period where you're first introduced to her and she becomes involved in, how does, what other things, her and also what other things sort of dictate or inform the process for the foundation to which projects it takes on and how those decisions are made?
Well, in the past, it was a family foundation, and we were shifting a little bit to more with outside members. What would happen is people in the community would make proposals, and they'd give them to me. And then I'd come to the foundation board and say, okay, we've got this much money to spend. Here are the projects that in front of us, and this is where we ought to spend the money. Then as we started working towards doing something here at Wormslow, I had to shift the philosophy of the foundation from, look, y'all, we're not going to be making community donations anymore. The money is going to be used on site. Not at my house, but on the public part. And so I had to get that ingrained in them and make them shift to realize this is where we were going. And then when Sarah said she could do this project, I knew the only way it would work is if she was president of the foundation. Well, that was a shift because we were bringing in an outside person to run the foundation. Well, it was hard on her because she had an agenda that she knew where we ought to go and what we ought to do, but various members of the board, my wife included, would say, well, I don't think we ought to do that, we ought to do this, or we ought to do that, we ought to do that. And then we'd say, no, we got to stay the course. We've got a big plan here for Wormslow with UGA. We've got to fund these graduate students. We've got to do this, we've got to do that. So there was a transition of philosophy of how the foundation ought to operate. Now, and this year for the first time, it worked as good as you could ever ask it. She had an agenda. She proposed it. This is where we ought to be spending our money at the university. This is what we ought to be doing. Everybody said, fine, let's go. You know, so my job more now is the treasurer, making sure that we have the money, that we can fund these grants. Her job is to develop those grants. And none of us on the board are capable. We don't know what engineering studies ought to be done or what butterfly studies ought to be done. This seminar she had yesterday, I mean, people came from Alabama, Florida, Tennessee to come to this thing. And they all said that what we're doing out here is so unique, it's amazing, it's one of a kind. Well, Sarah knew that when we started, that's what it would be. But my sister would have no way of knowing. Her idea of a butterfly research center is a butterfly garden in your backyard. You know, and this thing here now is really something. So we had to get the board time to see what she was doing and buy into it. And now I think they've bought into it. And when they see the cabins going up back there, they're going to flip out. It's moving terrific.
So I want to ask you, how were you able to persuade the foundation to trust Sarah? What is that process like? Is this a thing that how does one do that, to bring in an outsider in such a position of such influence? And because it seems to me that was critical in moving the foundation to a new phase.
Right, exactly. Well, first of all, I told you that I was a dictator. Okay? And I made the foundation. And I could remind anybody of that. And it's a privilege for them to serve on it something that I made work. But you don't ever go into a meeting unless you have your votes. So I had my votes, and I knew that the majority wanted Sarah. Okay, there's a lot of people that don't want change, and one of the board members, would always say, "Let's wait a year." Why do we need to wait a year? I mean, the person might not be there in a year. So you just had to play the politics, and But as we went along, Sarah had the time to function in her job and bring very, very important things to the site. So each year they could see the dynamics of change thanks to her, and so everybody pulls together, and they totally pulled together. And this year it was just everybody's going, ooh, oh, isn't this wonderful? But you just have to go through that process and bite your tongue and be patient, and then pound your fist on the table when you have to. I am the master at Wormslow. I have the responsibility of stewardship, and I have to make the tough decisions. If a board member wants to come down here and come to a meeting and give their 2 cents and then fly home, I got to make the decisions, and I'm happy to do it.
So, let me think for a minute. How has the process changed? Well, okay, so let me ask this first. Was everyone in the foundation supportive of what was going to be this new relationship with the University of Georgia, just generally speaking?
Yes.
So it was something everyone on the board wanted. So there wasn't any sort of division that way.
There was one division, and my son at that time thought that, because I had taught him wrong, he thought that I could always use the foundation property as leverage against the state, because it had no conservation easement on it, and everything else did. So if the state started bullying me around, I could say, well, I can make a mobile home park back there. Keep it up. And so I always told him that was our ace in the hole if we ever needed it. Well, now all of a sudden, I'm going to give it to the university, and he sees that ace in the hole leaving. Well, so he was opposed to it, but then he's now totally for it. I mean, totally. So I think it's total agreement. I respected him for his opinion, because he was trying to do his part to protect Wormslow his way, and I was trying to do it my way. And I let him do what he wanted to do, and I honored that and respected it. But I always believed that action would speak a lot louder, and it has. And he's loving every minute of it now.
So this early involvement with UGA and the fellows, were supporting those fellowships before Sarah's involvement?
No, after.
Okay, so
everything has happened, and that's what I was telling you. It was research in the past, and then it sort of nothing. Then everything took off when Sarah came. She has directed every Wormslow fellow. She's picked them. She's decided which ones we need now and which ones we need in the future. And all I've got to say is, every Wormslow fellow that's come on this property, it's been an honor to have them on the property. They're a pleasure. I've learned more from them than I ever learned in college. It's a wonderful experience, but it's all due to her leadership. in her direction.
Well, so I remember what I think now is that early incarnation of this, the very first stages of this, when it was rumored on the UGA campus that there was going to be this interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary relationship with Wormslow. And at that time, if I remember, the first Wormslow Fellows were Drew Swanson and Jessica Cook. And they were both doing very, very separate projects. And I think there were only 2 fellows in that first go around. But you had other entities here. There was the Center for Remote Mapping and Sensing, I think with CRMS, the university. And Irv Garrison was here with anthropology, working with Jessica. And Drew Swanson was a graduate student in history working under Paul Sutter. What are your recollections, your experience in those very first early days of seeing this idea take shape and seeing it implemented and having that here? Because on the other end of that, where I was just becoming aware of this and being asked to record interviews with people in this process, I had always wondered what it must be like on this end of it for you as the master of Wormslow, to have the University of Georgia come down and sort of see this sort of thing take off, but yet it's really it's sort of uncharted territory for everyone and for that relationship. And what is it like for you and Diana?
All right, let me tell you. I've had a lot of experience in preservation. I've been involved with endowments on historic houses, okay? I know the problems with house museums. Sarah, Dan's wife Jeannie, Diana and I traveled all over New England, went to state parks, national parks, house museums, land trust, you name it, okay? I'm absolutely convinced, and I know I'm right, and nobody can prove me wrong, that a house museum is an accident about to happen. And the reason is they want to restore everything back to its original point. And they can't. You can't buy heart pine anymore to put in the windowsills. So the wood rots quicker. The maintenance expenses are going through the roof, and the membership's staying constant. And if they raise the price too high, then they lose the tenants. So Wormslow can't be a house museum. It just can't be, because you can't make enough money to take care of it. So then you go to the state parks, and they're cutting the budgets. In Georgia, in '08, was whacking every state park they could, every historic site they could, and laying off people right and left, so the maintenance was falling off the charts. And we saw state parks all over New England that were trashy, they weren't maintained. We saw historic sites that weren't maintained. So what else is left? Well, research, education. If we have good research and good educational programs, that will protect the site more than any other thing on earth. And so when Sarah started bringing them in here, okay, I was bringing on, what can I do to help you? What can I do to make it easier for you? You know, so I was always out there trying to make their life more comfortable, their experience more enjoyable. Irv Garrison said, well, we can't do archaeological work around here. We don't have a lab. We converted my mother's hothouse into the best archaeological lab in Southeast Georgia. And we did it for practically nothing. So they've got a lab. I did that. Sarah comes up with this idea of the butterfly gardens. Well, we got out there on the tractors. I got my backhoe. She got on the tractors. We put in those gardens. So we're excited about it. This meeting we had yesterday, I mean, yeah, Donna and I worked our tails off helping get it ready and helping Sarah work her tail off. But last night, Donna says, that's the most exciting thing I've ever been to. So this is great.
When does the foundation form the Wormslow Institute for Environmental History? Is that soon after?
It's just Sarah did it right away.
Right.
She suggested it right away.
And
it's working.
And what was? How did she get you to do that? And what was the purpose of that from your eyes? You see, as far as being an instrument, or maybe an instrument isn't the right word. What was its function? What did the foundation see, and what did you see as its function in being able to move beyond sort of her role as president of the foundation?
Well, we sort of copied it. Sarah suggested it made me go over to Itchaway, to the Joseph Jones Research Center, to see them, see how they operate. And so they did the same thing, so we copied it based on what they've done. But Wormslow Foundation is a private foundation that is family driven. The Institute is a public foundation. So we receive grants and money from there. We build in the maintenance shed from the foundation, from the Wormslow Institute back there. The things the Institute can do that a private foundation can't do. So it gives us a lot more flexibility. And it also, I think if somebody wants to give a big grant, they would rather give it to the Institute than to a private family foundation. So it gives us a lot more flexibility. And it's gotten quite a name for itself.
Oh, right. So there have been successions of fellows and research since those 2007, 2008, those first fellows. And since that time, the Institute still exists and the foundation is still there. But there is a new relationship with the University of Georgia formed in there. And part of that is, a big part of that, or what's behind that, is the Center for Research and Education at Wormslow, which Sarah is the director. What's the history behind that development? Was there a need for a new stage?
Yeah.
And what was the vision for that, and
well,
what were those deliberations to? Because there was land involved in that formally also as well. That University of Georgia owns
15,
part of, yes,
15 acres.
Right.
Sarah has a master plan. It's bigger than any of us. Okay? She knows where she's going with this a lot more than I do. She tells me what I need to know and what I need to handle and get done and what the foundation needs to do. But she's got a bigger vision and a bigger picture. Okay? When we went through all these charrettes and all this discussion, trying to find out how best to structure this. Okay? And it just came back around to getting the university on this property and to have housing for students and research. And there's this whole coast of Georgia, and there's all this research going on. And there's becoming an awareness of the value of the coast of Georgia to the world global economy. Dan down in Echex thinks that Wormslow is a World Heritage Site. Well, the university will have a piece of property in a World Heritage Site. That's pretty significant. There's not a World Heritage Site in Georgia. So having that center, having these students here, having this research going on, and research that is very pertinent to Wormslow, but it's also pertinent to the coast, and some of it's pertinent nationally. I mean, this butterfly symposium, the information that the University of Georgia is coming up with butterflies is going to be very, very important nationally. A lot of the things that are coming out of here help Wormslow, but they have a national implication. And when Sarah comes up with this, I don't see it right away, but she does. And we're taking these kids to Sapelo, the students. Well, we get those 2 dormitories, we'll be able to bring, you know, a bunch of students down here and give them great trips and great experiences. I mean, you could bring students from the library down here and show them where the Durin collection was housed. How many would like to see that? You know, there's a lot of, just so much that can be done. Well, the more of that we do, the stronger the relationship between DNR, Georgia. And we already are waking up DNR because they're seeing what we're doing, and now they're going, holy moly, we need to catch up. They're spiffing up. So everything's feeding on everybody.
In this latest stage of your stewardship of Wormslow, what would you say has been the most difficult thing to manage in the last, well, just say with maybe the last 10 years, or maybe maybe we can talk about since.
Most difficult thing to manage is government intrusion.
Constant?
No, but when it rears its head up, it's ugly. And I mean, they want to widen the Diamond Causeway. And they want to infringe on the Confederate batteries. Those Confederate batteries don't mean anything. A 55-mile-an-hour speed limit is more important than the Confederate batteries. And if they put a curve, a fishing pier is more important. They have a fishing pier. They don't want to tear down the fishing pier, so they want to widen the road over here and destroy the Confederate batteries. On Wormslow, it's not costing them any money to destroy the batteries. So who's going to fight that? Let me tell you, the head of DNR and the head of DLT were next door neighbors. They barbecued in the backyard together. They told me that I made a deal with DLT and that I'd do this and I'd let them do that. Now, here's your head of DNR saying it's okay for DOT to do that. Well, who's going to fight it? Who's going to preserve the property? It's not fun, but you got to do it. And I did it, and they didn't widen the road. Yet.
I was going to ask you what you thought your legacy was here at Wormslow, but I think you've articulated that almost in that sentiment, or at least as far as resisting development.
Well, first of all, I recognize it as an honor to have the privilege to live here. It's an honor. There's no place on earth that I think is more beautiful and spectacular. And it's an honor to be able to ride down that avenue every morning and every afternoon. It's just unbelievable. Okay? I think that I have carried on the traditions of my ancestors as well as anybody could. But I think one of my strengths is to say, I can't worry about that. I got to fix this. I've got to go forward. I've got to move forward. You can't dwell on the past and try to maintain the past the way it was, because it isn't that way. You've got to change. And we've done that. And we cut down all those areas. We just cut down the whole forest. Well, is that change? Is that bad? No, because that was a field at one time. I'm just making it like it was before. I think we've improved the house. So I think when my son moves in there, there's a lot of things that he won't have to do. We just renovated a kitchen that was 43 years old. It had the original equipment in it. We just gutted all that, so he's going to have when he moves out, he'll have a new kitchen. And I think my legacy is I've helped build the Wormslow Foundation into a well-recognized organization. I've strengthened the relationship with the University of Georgia. It's always been there, but it's strong. I'm the first chairman of the board of the library, first chairman of the board of the press. Built 2 great boards at the university, and that's helped build this relationship out here. I think I've put it in a form that it'll make it so much better for my son to take it to the next step.
And Craig, is there anything else today that you'd like to talk about with us?
No, I think we've covered it all, and I've really enjoyed the opportunity, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting us down here to do this and letting us into the library. We thank you for your hospitality and for your interview.
Well, you're very welcome, and I hope you'll always feel welcome at Wormslow. Come back.
Thank you.